This video is brought to you by MasterTheScore.com. Master the Score is a new website dedicated to providing high-quality online classes taught by industry professionals. Their classes are some of the best that I have ever found, and I'm currently enrolled in their pilot class, Mixing Cinematic Music. Now, I am loving the course so far, and I do plan on making a video review after completing the entire course. But if you can't wait that long, there's a link in the description of this video, and every purchase made through it helps support the channel. So, with that, let's start the video. So one of the most common questions I get during my live streams is, how did you learn blank? And the anticlimactic answer is almost always, I studied it. You see, we are living in the middle of the golden age of self-education, and it has never been easier to learn how to write music. There is a ridiculous number of high-quality books, videos, and online classes to help you study, no matter what kind of budget or schedule that you're working with. However, the one downside to each of these is that they typically rely on your own self-guided study habits. And this can often lead to the incredibly frustrating experience of feeling like you haven't actually internalized or mastered any of the material you've been studying. And that is exactly what I want to try and help with. So in this video, I'm going to share my top 4 tips for teaching yourself how to write music. Starting with tip number 1. Tip number 1 is just take your time and don't rush. When I first started out, I would speed run through everything that I could find. It really wasn't uncommon for me to go through like 12 or more videos in one sitting when going through YouTube. And that didn't really result in anything useful, just a pile of notes on my desk. But eventually I found out that the key to actually mastering the material was to put a hard limit on how much material I could cover in a single setting. And today I try to limit myself to just one chapter of a book or one module of a class, just a handful of videos every 3 days at the absolute maximum. And this has really helped force me to slow down and make sure that I'm actually mastering the material before I move on. And that actually brings us to tip number 2, which is internalize the material before you move on. So it's not actually enough to just take notes. You have to actually use those notes. And personally, I like to use my notes to create flashcards. I like to use an app called Anki, but I've also found a lot of success with physical flashcards as well. You see, using flashcards to internalize all the information before moving on helps make sure that you're absorbing all the new material as you go. And this is incredibly important because, especially nowadays, lots of the resources out there are built in a progressive manner, meaning that every new material you cover is going to be used as a foundation for the next material. However, the downside to this is that flashcards can really promote an idea of just memorizing whatever's on the card, and that's not really enough. So that brings me to tip number 3, which is to teach yourself the material. And by that, I mean kind of pretend that you're teaching the material to an imaginary friend. I'll use my flashcards as a talking prompt. I'll draw a card, I'll see what I'm supposed to talk about, and I'll teach that material to my invisible friend. Then when I feel like I'm done talking, I'll flip over the card to make sure that I hit each of the talking points and that I got them correct. For example, when I was studying instrumentation, I made a flashcard for each instrument of the orchestra. I had on the front the instrument's name, and on the back their range, registers, and assorted tone colors they are capable of playing. When I studied these cards, I would pretend that I was teaching my invisible friend. I'd talk about the flute. I'd talk about what its sound is like. I'd describe my favorite soundtracks that feature it. And as I go along, I discuss different strategies and different tips for using the instrument as a young composer. Then, when I felt like I had talked about everything I needed to talk about, I'd flip over the card and double check that I'd hit each of the key talking points. This approach helped me internalize all of the information by forcing me to come up with new examples and new descriptions every time I drew a card. Now, this process does take a little bit longer than just rote memorization, but the results are infinitely more rewarding. Finally, we are at tip number 4, which is don't skip chapters or lessons. Now, this one might seem a little obvious, but it can be super tempting when you're taking a class or reading a book and you feel like a chapter is discussing something you already know about, or maybe something that you don't think you need to know about. However, the thing is that every teacher has their own perspective, and you never know when a chapter or a lesson is going to introduce some terminology or a concept in passing that's going to end up being very important as the lessons continue. So just as a rule of thumb, never skip a part of a lesson. So these are my top 4 tips, and I use them every week in my own studies of music theory and composition, and I'm currently using them on masterthescore.com. And this brings us to the end of another video. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to throw them in the comments below or send me an email at tabletopcomposer@gmail.com. I want to take a quick moment to thank my wonderful patrons for their support of this channel, as well as each of you who show your support for the channel through various different ways. I appreciate each of you more than you know. So until next time, keep studying, keep working hard, and keep writing new music.